What up? How y'all doing? Good. Y'all came to talk about death this morning, huh? A whole bunch of y'all came out. I want to talk about that. That's what's up. I'm glad to have you all here. Thanks for coming out. So I think I was going to do an activity with you all to kind of open it up, but we're kind of full. It might be kind of tough to do. So instead, I'm going to start, first of all, by telling you that since we're here in Loganberry Books, and since I believe it's really important to merge whatever your conversation is with space, I'm going to say that in talking about death, I'm going to do it through the lens of talking about story. And so we're surrounded by books and lots of stories in them, so it seemed appropriate to kind of draw that connection. So just so that you know, we're not going to talk about death per se, but we're going to talk about it through the lens of story. So I want to start by just telling you two different stories. Now I want you to tell me which story is a better story. So here's story number one. So I was walking to the store, and it was a regular day when I was going to the store, and I got to the store, and I'm looking around, and I'm wondering, what should I eat today? So I go to the back of the store, and I see some bologna. So I grab the bologna, and I'm like, no, that's not enough. Probably need like some bread. Nah, I'm not feeling the bread. I'm gonna get some crackers. So now I get the crackers. And then I'm like, I might need something to put on the crackers with the bread. So maybe I'll get some cheese. So now I got some cheese. So now I got bologna, cheese, and crackers. So I'm good. Nah, I'm not good. I need something to drink. I'll just get a soda. So I got the soda. So then I went to the register, and I got the cheese, the crackers, the bologna, the soda. I gave it to the guy at the register. I paid for it. And then I walked home, and I had a really great experience eating that and drinking my soda. Story number one. Woo! Story number two. So I go to the store, and I'm just like I'm real hungry. So I go inside, and I get everything that I need. So, you know, I got my bologna, I got my cheese, I got my crackers, I got all of that. So then I go to the register. But when I get to the register, there's this dude, and he's standing behind me, and he's breathing real heavy, right? He's just like, so, you know, I'm just doing my thing, but I'm hearing this heavy breathing behind me, right? So I'm like paying the guy, and then all of a sudden, the guy at the register freezes. This signals me to turn behind me. And I turn behind me, and dude is peeing on the floor. He's breathing heavy, and he's peeing on the floor. So I'm like, yo, what's up? And the register dude is like, oh yeah, that's just Champion. He does that like every other day. But he doesn't do it like that though. Like not so that it's like pee all over your shoes. So he yells at Champion to leave, right? So I'm standing in the store, but the thing was, outside in my car, I figure I'm just gonna come in here and grab what I gotta grab. I'm not thinking I'm gonna be stopped by this dude. So in the car was my computer bag. So I had been in there for like 7 minutes, and I go back out to my car, and my computer bag is completely stolen, my window smashed, and I'm like, oh man, all of this. So from now on, no matter where I'm at, I always take my bag and put it in the trunk. And that's all because of dude Champion. Story number two. Which one of those two stories did you like better, one or two? All right. Did anybody like story one better?
Yeah, I like that stuff.
You like that stuff? Riveting, right? So why do I tell you those two stories? So I tell you those two stories because one of the things that we oftentimes like to do in our everyday lives is interesting, because oftentimes what we want in our lives, we want story number one. That's what we want. We want to live our lives without a breach in the narrative. We just want to be able to be peaceful and do what it is that we do without twists and turns. That's what we prefer. But a story isn't a story without that breach, without that twist. It's not worth telling. And so why do we think about our own lives minus the breach in the narrative, when what really makes our lives worth living and what really makes a story worth telling is the breach? I would venture to say that a large part of the reason that we fear death is because it is the ultimate breach in the narrative. It is the ultimate transition, the ultimate change. So what I'm going to invite us all to do is just think about our lives within the context of story, which leads you to the question. First of all, what are the elements of a good story? So there are lots of people that have a conversation about what the great elements of a good story are. What are the essential elements of a good story? William Labov has what he calls his model of narrativity. And he says that a good story is broken down into 6 parts. You have the abstract, you have the orientation, which kind of orients the listener. You have the complicating action, the evaluation of what happened in the story, how it was resolved, and then the coda, the end of it. Usually when you say something like, so there's that, or, and that's what happened, that's the coda, right? So Labov says these are the elements of good story. Dope. I love William Labov. Ruth Finnegan, when she answers the question, what's in a story? Well, she says that there are these 4 things. She says it's a temporal or sequential framework, an essential explanation of coherence, some potential of universality or generalizability so that we all can follow the story, and the existence of a recognized or generic convention to make the story understandable by the performer of the story and by the listener of the story. So that's Ruth Finnegan. People that study narrative, right? But I always like to go back to Aristotle. And Aristotle has his term peripeteia. And what Aristotle says, all that stuff that Ruth Finnegan said, that's cool. And all that stuff that William Labov says, that's cool. And all these other folks that study story. But he says you always have to go back to peripeteia. It's the reversal of the situation in a plot or story. And according to him, it's the change of fortune that the hero in the story, which is you. It's the change of fortune that you should be an event that occurs contrary to your or your audience's expectations. And that is therefore surprising, but nonetheless appears as a necessary outcome of preceding actions. In other words, the breach, no matter how painful it is and how strange it is absolutely necessary to tell a good story or for you to tell a good life. Jerome Bruner builds on Aristotle's idea, and he simply says, quote, narrative in all its forms is a dialectic between what was expected and what comes to pass. For there to be a story, something unforeseen must happen. Story is enormously sensitive to whatever challenges our conception of the canonical. It is an instrument not so much for solving problems as for finding them. We often tell stories to forewarn than to instruct. And because of this, stories are culture's coin and currency. I like what he said, but I like even more scholar Trisha Rose's model of story through hip hop music and culture. And what she says is that all elements, all artistic forms, but particularly hip hop, has 3 essential elements of the narrative. And she says that those 3 elements are flow, layering, and rupture. I'm going to say this quote because I think it's so dope. So what Trisha Rose says is, what is the significance of flow, layering, and rupture as demonstrated on the body of hip-hop's lyrical, music, and visual works? Interpreting these concepts theoretically, One can argue that they contain and sustain rhythmic motion, continuity, circularity via flow, accumulate, reinforce, and embellish this continuity through layering, and manage these threats, these narratives, by building in ruptures that highlight the continuity as it momentarily challenges it. These effects at the level of style and aesthetics suggest affirmative ways in which profound social dislocation and rupture can be managed and perhaps contested in the cultural arena. Let us imagine these hip-hop principles as a blueprint for social resistance and affirmation. Create sustaining narratives, accumulate them, layer, embellish, and transform them. However, be always prepared for the rupture. Find pleasure in it. In fact, plan on social rupture. When these ruptures occur, use them in creative ways that will prepare you for a future in which survival will demand a sudden shift in ground tactics. This is basic hip hop culture. So we're all hip to the saying, go with the flow. But maybe what we should be saying more is go with the rupture. Embrace the rupture. And by embracing the rupture, we are embracing the challenges that come with it so that we are more enabled to deal with change. Dealing with everyday deaths in our lives. So when we consider our lives as stories of the self, why do we seek the essential quality of a good story, but we fear the breach in our own lives? And the reason for that, I like to say, is that we often look at death as the ultimate transience, or death as the ultimate breach in the narratives of our lives. But as I like to say, our daily challenge is to confront the fear of rupture within the context of our lives, so we can use these breaches in the narratives of our lives as opportunities to answer the essential questions asked of us by our cultural intelligence. This brings me back to who and what I am, which is a teacher. At my core, that's what I do. And so now what I want to talk about is the fact that urban schools fear the breach. Urban schools fear rupture. Oftentimes, if you walk into an urban school, the first thing that you're going to fear in that building, you're going to see in that building is fear. You're going to feel it when you walk in. It emanates from the top, from the administrators, all the way down to the students. And the reason for that is that schools are primary sites of struggle. Now, what do I mean when I say a school is a primary site of struggle? It's a place where there are all of these tensions that have emerged, and where all of these different players within the school building have an agenda. It's a place where power is playing out. That's because everybody in the school has an agenda. The arts administrator has an agenda. That agenda is to make sure that whatever the district has told her to do gets done in the building within the context of a federal government that says that your building must have students that pass these tests. So there's that. The principal has an agenda. The principal's agenda is to make sure that the teachers do what the district, vis-a-vis the federal government, said that the teacher must do, which is to make sure that these kids walk away with this bit of knowledge that shows that they can pass these tests. The principal has tension with the administration. The administration is engaged in tension with the federal government. The teachers, when they walk into a classroom, armed with the fear that comes all the way down to them, have an agenda in the classroom. That agenda is for you, students, to shut up and take what it is that they're telling me that I have to give to you. The students have a different agenda. The students' agenda: I want to know how to survive in this world. Tell me how to do that. If you don't tell me how to do that, I can't survive. So there's all of this tension going on in the building. This is what I mean by schools as a primary site of struggle. And this is why you have so much fear inside the school buildings. Does this make sense? The fear is that no one is going to meet their agenda, right? So how do we then go into school buildings and transform that culture of fear? How do we shift the breach in the narrative so that we're not afraid to enter buildings? So that we, when we go into buildings, are not afraid of the ultimate change. How do we embrace the change? How do we embrace the death of our agendas, the death of what we know, so that we can create life? So that we can transform that death into something meaningful and something tangible, so that all of us get what we want. Answer: embrace the change. So I'm going to give you a perfect example of what I mean. I'm a teacher. I go inside of my building. I have my lesson plan. I have my scope and sequence. We have met these objectives to this point, and today is the crux. This is like the hook. If I get this done today, I know they got it. I go into my room, and there's 4 students that are in the back crying. I don't know why. But again, as soon as I walk in, I feel fear. I feel tension. So, I've got a fork in the road. I know that I have my agenda. But in order to meet my agenda, am I going to try to push through? Am I going to try to ignore the breach in the narrative? Or am I going to look at the breach, the thing that's telling me that something is wrong, and am I going to absorb that breach, learn it, mold it, listen to it, and try to meet the agenda? One thing I can do is push on. Teach my lesson as if nothing has happened. This is the road that's less fearful. The road that's more fearful is for me to engage with the students and find out what's wrong. So I do that. What's wrong? They don't want to tell me at first, then they tell me. What's wrong is that somebody was shot on their way to school yesterday, and they're still dealing with that. And one of the girls that's crying, that was her best friend's brother. So her brother is in a hospital room just walking home to school, and he gets shot. And now he's in the hospital fighting for his life. And these girls are in the back crying, trying to console each other, trying to figure out, how am I going to make it through the day? If I ignore that, teaching does not get done that day. It does not get done that day. But because of the fear, we do that every day. And it's not just within the context of the school as institution. It's within the context of every institution that we come into contact with. And so again, the question becomes, how can we confront ourselves and our institutions to take on the breach, to deal with it, to not ignore it, to not say, I just want my day to be a healthy, beautiful day. And to absorb that breach, absorb that little death so that it makes us better, so we can all get to where we need to get. So going back to those students, just by talking with them, here's what happens. I may not get to my lesson today, but what I can do is I can listen to them, and I can say to them, this is how your experience relates to the lesson that we got today. Be empathic, listen, and then more lessons are going to come out of that, because if I'm the astute teacher, if I'm the teacher that is really about education and not about schooling, because there's a difference. But if I'm really about education, I take that and I understand that there's more that I can teach, because now I'm learning from them. And we are co-constructing a new narrative together. So my challenge for you, even in our everyday moments, when we fear change, embrace it. Embrace the rupture. Go with the rupture. Don't fear it. And it's cool to go with the flow. We're good at that. We're real good at that. But go with the rupture. Listen to it. Embrace it. because in it you'll find less fear of our own lives and of the circumstances that change so that we can embrace it. This is a principle that is very similar, and I'm going to leave you here. Very similar to, I used to practice many moons ago a religion called Ifa. And one of the poems within that was very important to me. And is this: there is no childbearing woman who cannot give birth to an Ifa priest. There is no childbearing woman who cannot give birth to Oromia, this God, himself. Our Father, if he fully brings us into being, eventually, we will bring him into being. Our Mother, if she fully gives birth to us, eventually, we will give birth to her. This was the teaching of Ifa for Oromia, who said he would bring heaven to earth and he would take earth to heaven. As this passage illustrates, one is reminded that those who give birth to you will someday come back through you, that life is a cycle that we're all part of. We are taught that we are not born into sin, nor is there judgment day or hell to fear. But what is to be avoided is to live a life that is so unremarkable that one does not return from the world of the ancestors to rejoin the family line. Immortality is a life that's learned through returning through the rupture, to learn the lessons one has to learn to help one's family ascend to higher levels of living. One must embrace the rupture. One must embrace the eternal return in order to raise the vibration of the earth so that the entire world lifts up and ascends to the next level of ascendance. It's through the rupture, it is through the return that we embrace death, embrace ourselves, embrace change, and create a new world. I think that's all I got to tell you. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you have walked away with a new conception of death. And really that you think about, that we continue to think about those struggles, those little things that we go through as ways to transform. And we say that all the time, right? But to do that in practice, even as we're going through a lot of pain and struggle, just remembering that it is that rupture that is really going to take us to the next place. And I am truly, I live that. I have learned to embrace the rupture. I have learned to be comfortable with discomfort. If I could not be comfortable with discomfort, I would not be standing here in front of you. I'm going to give you one last personal example. I thought I was going to be quiet, but I'm not. I'm about to turn around and preach at the choir. So, about a year and a half ago, I had what I thought was the job of my lifetime. I was a teacher, and I was considered nationally as one of the best teachers at what I do in this country. I did it for 4 years. I was very, very happy, and I was very successful. I never thought that I would not be doing that job with those kids. Suddenly, very suddenly, I was fired. So, let me tell you something about where I worked. If you are a teacher, and if you are a teacher who teaches in the arts, you have your students every day. From the time they are in the 9th grade until the time they are seniors. You have them every day. You are another parent for them. When you work with young people every day for 4 years, and in the summers, you are like another father. In fact, if you're really good at what you do, they call you dad. I got a lot of kids out here that call me dad. But at that school in particular, I had a lot of kids that called me dad. So when I was let go, those kids were devastated, and I was devastated. It's the first time I cried in a very, very long time, because I literally was taken from my children. I was financially devastated, personally devastated, and I could not for the life of me understand why this could happen to me. But what I didn't realize is that everything that I had built there, the relationships I had built with those kids and their parents and their families, and the community that saw the work I was doing, I realized maybe it's time for me to embrace this rupture. Maybe something new has to happen. It was out of that 12 Literary Arts was born. 12 Literary Arts became the same space that I was teaching inside of that classroom for a whole new group of kids all across the city. So I'm no longer working in kids in that classroom that come to me. I'm now going to kids all across Northeast Ohio, taking the same methods and the same approach that I was doing and transforming the lives of youth everywhere, all over Northeast Ohio. So I didn't know. That breach, that rupture was a death for me. It was a real death for me. But I had to embrace that. And I had to realize that it was just a part of my story so that I could change, so that I could embrace it and change the lives of others. I had to listen to what the community was telling me, and if you believe in a higher power, to what the higher power was telling me. I had to listen to that. And as painful as it was, as much of a rupture, as much as it almost killed a big part of me, I had to embrace that death in order for me to transform and to create something new. There's a lot of people in this room now that know 12 Literary Arts, but didn't even know what I was doing before. And that's because I embraced death. I embraced that change. I challenge you to do the same, because you never know the beauty that you're gonna make when you do that. You never know. So there's that.